I'm Rick Wade, Senior Vice President for Strategic Alliances and Outreach at the United States Chamber of Commerce. Several years ago, we launched the Equality of Opportunity Initiative to advance both private sector and public policy solutions to help close what we call opportunity gaps in our country in very important areas like entrepreneurship and certainly employment. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague, Cutis Dubay, our Chief Economist, for a very important conversation about the employment landscape in America, in which it appears that an aging, smaller workforce simply is our new reality. Cutis, thank you for joining me.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Cutis, I'm intrigued. Let's jump right in, man. Listen, for years, we've known that there's been millions of jobs without people and millions of people without jobs. In other words, far too few workers relative to the size of our population. You've asserted that this chronic shortage of workers will be a fact of life for businesses for many years to come. Simply put, a smaller workforce is the new normal. How did we get here, Cutis?
Yeah, Rick, it's a great question, and it really is the new normal. For the longest time, as long as the data goes back, we've always had more unemployed workers than we've had job openings. So what we focused on was the unemployment rate, how many jobs are created month to month. Now, in the aftermath of COVID, we've accelerated the point, which is always coming, where it's now going to be the opposite. We're going to have more job openings than we have unemployed workers to fill them for the foreseeable future, probably for the rest of our lifetimes. Right now, there are roughly 9 million job openings in the economy and about 6 million unemployed workers. That's a gap of 3 million. Now, that might come down, but I don't expect it to ever be for job openings to ever fall below the number of unemployed workers. And it all comes back to our demographics. We have an aging society, and we've had it for a very long time. It tracks very closely. And by the way, to all the viewers, we have all this data in slide decks, and you're welcome to it. Just let us know and shoot us an email, shoot us a note, and we'll pass it along to you. But you can see it very clearly in the data, and we have charts that show it. Labor force participation follows the track of the baby boomers. The baby boomers were a very large generation. When they started entering the workforce in the early to mid 1960s, labor force participation rises really quickly. And it rises and rises and rises until about the early 2000s. And it's been falling ever since then. It started falling because they started to retire. They're going to retire for the next maybe 15 more years. And so that's going to continue to reduce this share of the population that is working. It's not all that complicated a story. Our population is aging and older people work less. And succeeding generations are just not big enough to make up the slack.
Yeah, and the reality is, the aging population has been a long foreseen challenge. That's nothing new. But one of the things that you talk about when you say there's the population pyramid is becoming inverted, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so I'm not a demographics expert, but I think it's pretty straightforward. What you want future generation to be bigger than the current generation. It helps for growing the size of the economy, for the workforce. It helps for old age programs like Social Security and Medicare. But what has happened is that the baby boomers were an enormously big generation. Generation X, the next generation after them, was smaller than the baby boomers. And that began the problem. That's why we don't have enough workers coming into the system. And then you get the millennial generation and Generation Y. Those are bigger generations. They're bigger than Generation X, but they're not as big as the baby boomers. And I think maybe one of them is slightly bigger, but not by enough. So instead of if you start at the top with the oldest generation and then growing below it, we have the biggest generations at the top, and then the ones below it are smaller or at very best about the same size. So rather having a pyramid or a square like this, it at best is like a rectangle or even an inverted triangle, and that's why we end up in the situation.
So in this inverted triangle, one of the things you think about when you think about workers, and you got to think about the youngest of the youngest, I would imagine, and I'm curious as we think about kids, even on the education front. I think I saw where there are fewer first grade students enrolled in school than high school students in some 30 states. I think that's an interesting statistic. But what's driving this? And what are the implications for the workforce of today and the future?
Yeah, again, it's back to demographics and fertility and birth rates. We're
Hmm.
just not having as many children as we used to have, and that means that there's going to be fewer kids coming through the educational system and then becoming workers later on. So it has a lot of implications. One, for the economy, that as people get older, they consume more, they produce less and consume more. So we're going to have more consumers than we have producers. That's the key issue for businesses. But then when it comes to schools and communities that run schools and towns and localities across the country, and even higher education, we're going to have smaller class sizes. We've gotten used to the situation where we don't have enough space for students because the schools weren't big enough. It's going to be the opposite in a lot of places now, because there's not succeeding classes of kids are not going to be big enough. So we're talking smaller class sizes. We're talking revenue crunches for colleges, which really kind of changes how we view the problems, basically K through 12, and then in higher education as well. It's really going to be kind of a paradigm shifting event.
Wow. Another demographic that I think is very interesting. You talked about this retreat of men from the workforce. If men aren't working, what are men doing? I mean, tell us more about this dynamic of men retreating from the workforce.
Yeah, so there's no doubt that it's the aging of the population that's driving workforce participation down. But there's some other key underlying data statistics that really help make the point even better. And the biggest one, other than aging, is men's retreat from the labor force. So in say the 1950, let's take 90% of men were in the labor force. As of the latest numbers, it's under 70. I think it's about 68, 69%. So 20% of men who otherwise would have been working are no longer working. That's a huge population of men who are outside the labor force. And it applies to, so aging accounts for some of that, but also, so if you look just at those who are in their prime working years, ages 25 to 54, the number is also startling. Almost 100%, I think it was 97% of prime age working males were in the labor force in, say, 1950. As of the latest data, it's about 87%. That doesn't sound as drastic as that 20% gap. But again, we're talking about men in that 30-year or so cohort who are in the years they should be earning and working the most, and they're just not in labor force. So there's a lot going on. Some of it could be that they're in the shadow economy or in the black market economy. Let's call it the informal economy. So what these folks are doing is they're working for cash off the books. So think about an auto mechanic who works at local garages around the neighborhood, probably putting in 8 to 10 hours a day, maybe even more, but is not on the books. It's taking cash at the end of the day. And that can apply for a lot of different industries and a lot of different workers. So there's definitely some of that, but there's also, we know that if they're not working, they're spending about 4 hours a day compared to men who are working on leisure and sports and recreation. That's a lot of time. What we don't know is if they're playing or doing that stuff because they are not working, or they're not working because they're doing those things. And that's a key thing that we have to figure out. This is something that researchers are really going to have to dig into. This is something that academic work would be really helpful for, is finding out what that cohort of men are doing with their time rather than engaging in the formal labor force.
Well, listen, I got to figure out how to do both: work hard and then find more time to do leisure, sports, and recreation. I think that now is it logical that women are replacing men in the workforce? Is that a logical conclusion?
Yeah, right. That's the next part of this, and I should have moved right into that. For a long time, so from the late 60s and really the 70s, what happened was women entering the workforce made up for the decline of men in the workforce. So men were leaving, at least the formal working world, and women were entering at really large numbers. And those two things offset each other, and it wasn't. And again, the aging was in reverse. We were a younger society, and we had baby boomers coming in, so it wasn't an issue. What happened is that in about, again, the year 2000, women peaked as a percentage of labor force. That we hit a ceiling, and the exact number escapes me, but probably around roughly 80% of women were in the labor force. We hit that peak and we've come slightly down since then. So it's hard to get many more women. I think actually as of last month, I think we're back to a record number of women participating in the labor force. So we've hit kind of the ceiling. We can't get many more back in. Many women choose still to remain out of the workforce. So we can't get a whole lot there to help offset the problem. We certainly have to do things like improve childcare to make it easier for those who want to engage in the labor force to do so. But in terms of women being offsetting the decline in men, that part of that phenomenon is now over.
Huh. You touched on childcare. I was just about to ask you. So in the middle of men and women are children. How important, or what is the impact of childcare, and is as related to this smaller workforce being the new normal? I mean, how big is that of an issue?
It was a very big issue during COVID because for both men and women who wanted to return to work, who had children who were below school age, they could not get as much childcare as they needed to get back to work in an office setting in a full-time way. We've largely gotten that problem solved. I think it just took time to get back up. The problem now is in some areas, so like in urban areas here in Washington, D.C., getting access to childcare is very difficult and it's very expensive. In other areas, it's just that it's expensive. You can get it. You don't have wait lists like you have here in urban areas, but it still remains very, very pricey. And it's a very difficult problem to solve because throwing more money at the problem or giving subsidies just increases demand. And if you don't increase supply, you're just pushing the price further up. And it's proven difficult for the government at the federal and state and local level to figure out how to increase the supply of childcare. And of course, the price is already high, and you have workers in daycare centers who the pay isn't all that great, so there's not a lot of easy. It's not easy to draw demand in. But if they raise wages or to draw labor in, if they raise wages, prices are going to go up even further. So we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place when it comes to childcare, and it is an impediment for many women who would like to work more hours. We know this is the case. What I was getting at is it's not a silver bullet, though. It's not going to be the main thing that solves the problem. It's definitely part of the solution, getting more childcare, making it more affordable so that we can get as many women into the labor force as we possibly can. But we're going to have to, and we'll get to this, there's a lot of other solutions that have to be tackled as well.
Yeah. This great resignation that I guess that was a result of the pandemic. What's the final analysis? Did COVID help create the worker shortage? Did it create the worker shortage? But what's your thoughts on the real impact of the COVID pandemic?
So the answer is it's a little nuanced. It's actually both a little yes and no. Yes, it caused a major worker shortage. People left the workforce in droves. They left for lots of reasons. They could have been sick with COVID. They could have been caring for somebody who was with COVID. They could have had long COVID or caring for somebody with long COVID. They could have been furloughed. They could have been engaging in an industry that was largely shut down because of COVID. So COVID had a really big impact. But then, of course, you had the enormous fiscal support. You had rounds of checks, extra unemployment benefits, really, really plussed up child tax credits, all these different forms of fiscal support that really contributed to an enormous glut of savings and made it less important, or it made it less necessary for some people to remain in the labor force. And if they were doing a job that wasn't particularly pleasant, the public was not real fun to deal with during and after COVID, a lot of them decided to forego working and spend that savings down, which made sense and now has largely run out. So what COVID did was it accelerated the point at which we were going to have way more job openings than we had workers to fill them. And so that would have happened in the coming years. It brought that situation to the present, and now it will remain that. So it did cause a worker shortage. That is now largely abated, but because of all the changes that happened and everything that's going on in the economy since COVID, we are now just brought the future to the present, and we'll remain in the situation where we have far too few workers.
Curtis, we talk a lot about the problem. We think about solutions. Some point to immigration as perhaps a panacea, or at least a key part of the solution. I mean, just how much does immigration matter as a part of this whole matrix on worker shortage as a normal?
So immigration is the key thing. So there are things we can do to help mitigate the problem with the worker shortage. The main one's immigration. So let's circle back to that in a second. The other thing we can do is we get men back. We need to get men. We got to figure out why they're not working, get them back in the labor force, get as many women as we possibly can in the labor force by improving access to childcare. More births are a difficult way to get more workers. It takes 18 to 20 years for a child to become a worker. And then as been proven around the world, raising birth rates is very, very difficult. That is a very hard challenge to surmount. And so it's going to be. It would be better to have more children and more births, but that's not going to be something that we can rely on to fix the worker shortage in the near term. So we're going to have to look to other solutions, and immigration is one of them. We are going to need more legal immigration, bringing in workers with all different skill levels, from very highly skilled to unskilled workers, because we need workers at all those different levels. And that's another important thing that we should highlight. This is not a worker shortage in just any one particular industry, one particular region. It's everywhere. Every region, every industry, every sector, every business is going to be experiencing a worker shortage going forward. So we do a lot of these presentations to groups that fly in, other chambers of commerce that come into DC. We talk to them often. I go around the country frequently and give presentations. And in each and every one of those in the last couple of years, I ask people to raise their hands. So let's assume it's thousands at this point of business owners that we've talked to over in the last couple of years. And I ask them all, I say, do any of you have all the workers that you need? And in all that time, all the thousands of people I've asked that question, only one person has raised their hand. He was from Gwinnett County, Georgia. We need to find out what he's doing to get all the workers he needs. But just one. Everyone else has kept their hand down and said no. They need more workers. So again, this is not specific to any particular industry sector, region, whatever it may be. This is an economy-wide problem. So we're going to need immigration in a big, big way to help solve it.
And I would imagine we kind of have to look everywhere, turn over every stone, every rock, and we think about tapping into talent pools such as, what about those formerly incarcerated? I mean, that we at the chamber, we've done a whole business case for second chance hiring. Could they help close this gap?
Yes, absolutely. We need to do it's all of the above type solution here. So anything that can help get us more workers is going to be welcome. And that's definitely something that we should be doing. If somebody has paid their debt to society, we should make it easier for them to come back into the workforce. And I think that would, because incarceration rates are higher for men, I think that would definitely help bring more men back into the workforce. It's definitely part of the solution, is making it easier for them to get back into the formal economy. It would go again, not a silver bullet. Nothing really is. The thing that has the biggest impact will be immigration, because you can get the most people that way. But this is certainly, second chance hiring is certainly part of the solution.
Kurt, I have to ask you this question. I mean, you think about technology, automation, artificial intelligence, help or hurt? How do you think about artificial intelligence?
Yeah, great question. It helps. Here's how it helps. And this applies for any bit of technology going back to the Industrial Revolution. So of course, if you know the history, one of the first things out of the Industrial Revolution was looms, making textiles and fabrics using water power. And the Luddites went and destroyed those because they were going to take the jobs of those who wove textiles by hand. What actually happens, though, whether it's that kind of nascent early technology or more digital technology that we have today, is that things like that, technology makes workers more productive. So there's dislocations in the immediate term. There's some people who are put out of jobs, but overall, the economy is made better off. We're made richer with better technology. I see AI as a tool like any other tool. It's going to make all of us more productive in the long run. Certainly, some jobs will end up being automated that are now done by people directly, but those people will move into higher value jobs and ultimately be paid more. So I think AI is a really big part of the solution when it comes to the worker shortage, because it can fill the role for some positions. Those people that can then fill other positions that AI doesn't do such a good job of, and then the rest, everyone else, AI will make us more productive. So where we might have needed 2 workers, 1 worker with AI will be able to do the job. And because we have so many job openings, that's not going to be a problem in the way that some fear it might be. And so what we're going to see is we're going to see businesses investing significantly in capital to perform make their good or perform their service. And we know this is the case because we saw this during COVID. They had immense worker shortages, and they figured out ways to do what they needed to do, regardless of the fact they didn't have enough workers. So the same principle is going to apply going forward. Businesses are going to figure it out. So they're going to get as many workers as they can. By the way, they're going to have to pay them more. Wages are there's going to be continued upward pressure on wages because that's the key thing that you do to attract and retain workers is pay higher wages. So debates about minimum wage, the $15 minimum wage, those are probably over. Maybe even the debate over what a living wage is, because I anticipate hourly wages to be very strong for the foreseeable future. So they're going to do the best they can to get workers, but on top of that, they're going to need to invest in all sorts of technologies, AI being one of them, automation being another. But look for AI and technology and capital investment to go into all sorts of things that you never would have thought would be the case. So yeah, you're going to go to fast food places, and those are going to be largely automated. And in some ways, they're largely there or getting there now. You order at a kiosk. Now the food will probably be made automated. That we're going in that direction, and that would apply for a lot of things that we kind of know about. But the example I use, where you're going to see a lot of technological investment, is things like it is a service sector, like at hotels, the people who clean and turn over rooms. There's not enough of them. We've all seen this when we're traveling around the country, and you can see it starting. But and this is technology. The design of the rooms is changing. I just stayed in a newer hotel in Newport, Rhode Island last week. I just had to get in and go to sleep, get up and do a presentation and leave. So I was only there probably wasn't even there for 12 hours. So the design of the room was fine. It had a bed, the bathroom was fine, but you could just kind of tell and look at it. Again, it's a newer build. It was designed in a way to make it easier for the workers to turn the room over in the morning. So it's that type of investment that is going to be necessary for the hotel industry. But you can also think about them giving the workers more technology. So instead of them going from room 401 to 402 to 403 cleaning throughout the day, they're going to have an iPad that's connected to the front desk, and the desk is going to know who's checked in and which rooms they need first, and they're going to follow a pattern. It's going to say, go from room 401 to 219 and then to 512, rather than just do the routine that you're used to. Those type of things are what's going to be necessary for businesses to invest in to do the job while we experience too few workers.
Wow. What a fascinating example. Connected to that, one last question as we wrap up. You think about automation and AI and technology, and we think about our work and equality of opportunity, which is sort of, reaching out to and closing gaps in underrepresented or underserved communities. Is the issue there, how wide of the gap around skills? Should we be investing more in closing the skills gap, particularly in science and technology, what we call STEM? But how important is that as we think about workforce and jobs of the future?
It's incredibly important. What we need to do is be doing a better job for all communities of getting them the skills that employers are going to need in the future. So I dug in a bit to the data when it comes to different races and their labor force participation. And what's interesting is that, so overall labor force participation has fallen sharply over time. But whether you're looking at Asian, Black, or Hispanic, they're in overall those races, the labor force participation is holding up pretty strongly. So I then dug in and looked at by sex. Black men have fallen enormously out of the labor force. So that's one key area. So not just looking at men, but looking at Black men and figuring out why they have retreated so much from the labor force and helping get them back to work. And as you hit on, we need to figure out how to get them the skills that businesses need. We don't do a good job in our educational system of aligning those things. So I think this is a great thing for the chamber to work on, and something we definitely do. We do a lot of work on workforce. We're going to be doing a lot of work on worker shortages, but figuring out what do businesses need, what are they going to need 10 and 15 years down the road, what skills do potential workers have, and if they don't have them, how do we get them those skills? Because they're not getting them through the educational system. There's got to be ways that we can do a better job of getting those skills to them, and we can figure out which. But this is easy data to pull. This isn't all that difficult. It sits right in government websites. Where are those biggest pools of potential workers? Getting and figuring out how to get them those skills. And again, so it's men, particularly Black men, and how do we do all that is something that we're going to focus on. It's something that Congress should be focusing on because it's going to be a major problem for businesses going forward.
Yeah, and I will tell you, I think that's the excitement of the chamber, the private sector, in as much as these are big challenges. This is what we do. We lean in, we help solve them. So let me just conclude by saying, if you add all of this together, one could, in our audience, could leave here just feeling that labor force participation, it appears rather grim. So I give you the parting thought on, where do we go from here? The hope, the optimism. You got to look in the crystal ball. Give the audience some parting thoughts.
So yeah, the bit of the optimism is that we as the business community have figured out how to tackle challenges in the past, and particularly this one again through COVID, and we'll figure it out again in the future. What that means is that businesses are going to do the investment they need to in technology and figuring out ways to, again, make their good or provide their service, regardless of how many workers they have. The good news for workers is that if you want a job, you're going to be able to have one, and your wage will be pretty strong. We've seen that in the aftermath of COVID, and that is likely to continue. And the other, silver lining is that this is going to become such an acute problem that our policymakers are going to have to address it. So they're going to have to do something on immigration because we're going to be clamoring so strongly for workers. We're going to have to do something at the education front because it's going to be so blindingly obvious, it pretty much is now, but it's going to be painfully obvious that we need to get workers skills that employers demand. So that when we finally get to that point, maybe we can finally get some solutions from our policymakers that have been held up for far too long.
Got it. Listen, Cutis Dubay, our chief economist, thank you so much for taking part of your day, for sharing these important insights as we think about not only addressing this interesting, challenge of a smaller workforce as our new normal, but making sure that as we do build the workforce of the future, that's inclusive, that everybody who wants a job has access to a job and can pursue their own American dream. Thanks, Cutis. Appreciate you.
Thank you.